So I'm leading this panel, and this panel is about looking back. It's the three of us sitting before you have lost a young boy to Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And so we're not going to discuss what all that implied in terms of the death and that impact. Because I think when you receive a diagnosis of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, you begin the grieving process for the person who's alive. And so in fact, I think we all are grieving. And so we're going to talk about some learned experiences, some of the things that we think about as we look back on our lives. And so I'm going to begin the testimony with Jeff Watkins.
Hello, thank you, Pat. My name's Jeff Watkins. I live in Annapolis, Maryland, just down the road from here. And my son Noah was 33 years old when he passed away 2 years ago from Duchenne. And I'll just read you a little bit about my story. When our son Noah was diagnosed with Duchenne in 1988, my wife Lily and I had just moved from Colorado to Maryland, where I joined a small consulting firm based in Annapolis. I was 41 and Lily was 33 when Noah was diagnosed. Noah's brother and only sibling, Woody, was 14 months younger than Noah at the time and does not have Duchenne. Noah's grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins all lived out of state and other states throughout the eastern U.S., so they weren't really around for local support. However, because we lived in a very close-knit neighborhood and both boys were very adept at making friends, we never felt isolated and never felt like we didn't have local emotional support, although it wasn't directly from family members. The diagnosis, of course, was emotionally devastating. On a physical level, it felt like a truck had just run over us. I'll never forget the feeling. But my job enabled us to allow Lily to not have to work outside the home. And so she essentially was a full-time advocate for Noah. This was extremely important to his quality of life, and this subject came up earlier in the day. It's incredible how much there is to do to support a diagnosis of Duchenne. She was able to uncover numerous public and private resources that helped with home modifications, paid caregivers, and allowed Noah to participate in sports. His brother Woody played a central role in enhancing Noah's quality of life. He always made sure Noah was included in activities, physical activities, as much as possible with friends and family. They were only 14 months apart, and he became Noah's best friend and biggest social advocate. We were an outdoor family. We liked sailing, skiing, hiking, camping. Noah was born in Colorado. Sports were a big part of our existence, and then boom, this happens. This made everything more challenging, but we tried to participate in as many physical activities with Noah and as a family as possible. As Noah became more dependent on his wheelchair, he joined a wheelchair sports club, league, and we'd go skiing in Colorado at Winter Park he could do sit skiing. He'd sit on a chair, and a skier behind him would break him before he crashed into the trees, which he really wanted to do quite a few times. They both Woody and Noah attended public schools here in Maryland. They graduated from high school. Noah went on to Salisbury University took him 5 years to get a 4-year degree, which was pretty amazing considering the challenges he faced there. And that would not have been possible without friends and fraternity brothers at school. They basically treated Noah as a brother during that period of time. And Noah was small. He was challenged in height like many Duchenne boys are, but that worked to his advantage in the sense that he was never very heavy. And so his brother could transfer him, and most people could transfer Noah into swimming pools and onto sit skis and things like that. So he had as active a life as he possibly could because of his size, actually. So after Noah graduated from college, he came home to Annapolis to live with us, and he took a part-time job doing some market research. He had a degree in marketing. He was rapidly losing upper body strength at this time, and so his time using a computer was limited, so he couldn't keep his job very long. Just about this time, Lily, his mother, was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she died 3 months later at age 50. So then Noah goes, oh my God, my dad, I got to live with him the rest of my life. I had to put a little humor in that one. So Woody and I looked at each other and said, okay, it's the three of us now. Noah came to was living with me. Woody was finishing college. It took him about another 6 months to get out of school. Instead of going on to a career in New York City, he went to school in New York. He came back to live in Annapolis and work there so he could be near Noah. Because I had my own business, I could take time off to be with Noah as well. So even though his care became a lot more intensive the older he got, between Woody, myself, and a dedicated team of caregivers, Noah essentially could enjoy the last years of his life. He got caught pneumonia at age 33, and that was a tough battle, and he didn't win that one. But one thing about Noah, he never, ever complained about his condition, and he never used it as an excuse to participate in life. He battled until the end, and his life has been inspiration to all his friends and family who are now stronger from knowing him.
Thank you, Jeff. Brian?
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Denger, and I live in Maine with my wife Alice and son Patrick. My adult daughter, Rachel, lives in Portland. We survived my son Matthew, the young boy with the dark hair, the taller one, and the picture with the two, and then the one with the red shirt with the tie and the glasses. We survived my son Matthew, who succumbed to heart failure, a consequence to his having Duchenne muscular dystrophy that was diagnosed at age 5. My family is no stranger to chronic illness. We live with Crohn's disease, type 1 diabetes, asthma, and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I believe that gives me a bit of license to challenge this often mentioned quote, and it's attributed to Augustine Burroughs from the book Dry. When you have your health, you have everything. When you do not have your health, nothing else matters at all. I believe this is patently false, and this is my thesis. My case study is Matthew, who was diagnosed at 5 in 1997. His brother Patrick also lives with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Despite losing the ability to walk at age 8, Matthew did well in school, living his dream and attending college, and planned to work in Washington, D.C. He attended college as a political science major. Regularly surrounded by friends, actively involved in college life, he matured on campus. Simultaneously, he participated in clinical trials, and we traveled regularly out of state for clinic. Life in the pursuit of goals was important to Matthew. In spite of limited physical ability and diminishing endurance, he lived every day to capacity. Heart failure took him during his sophomore year in college at age 20. Irrespective of failing health, Matthew had a life that mattered. Matthew was a valued member of our family and well regarded by his teachers, his friends, and his peers. Alice and I willingly cared for him at home and on campus. We brought him to expert clinic directed by physicians who were very experienced in Duchenne and explored life-extending interventions alongside of our son. Upon reflection, every measure taken on my son's behalf was worth the burden or costs. With every minute, we bargained for another. Each tactic to slow progression was weighed against hope. It's the gamble taken by every family. Each new stage is preceded by fear and sadness, followed by compensation, and transforms to acceptance. Stability at any stage becomes welcome. All the difficult moments we face pale in comparison to the hardest of all, learning to live without someone so loved. I find my family's situation sort of a bridge between this panel and the following group. Patrick, now 23, graduated from college this past May. He drives independently and is employed at the university he attended. No more tenacious than his brother, his circumstances illustrate what could have been for Matthew had robust treatment been available. As Patrick lives his life supported by our family, it amplifies my opinion that much matters regardless of one's health. Investing in better treatments will serve to improve outcomes and opportunity for those who live with chronic illness. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So my name is Pat Furlong, and I'm from Middletown, Ohio, a very small little burg about 35 miles north of Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm a carrier of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I didn't have this information when I married an Irish Catholic football player. I've had 7 pregnancies. Miscarriages in the first trimester followed every live birth. I have 4 children, and in order of appearance, Jenny in 1974, Michelle in 1976, Christopher in 1978, and Patrick in 1980. How many children do you have? Is a question that stops my heart every time it's asked. How do you respond to that question now? On a sunny day in June in 1984, Chris and Patrick were diagnosed with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and while the word Duchenne was not in my vocabulary, I would often sit in my car after taking Chris and Patrick to school, wondering why other children literally flew up the steps. I struggled to understand that. My daughters could, the children could, my sons could not. I listened while family members talked about their big calf muscles. They said, just like Tom, this 230-pound, 6'3" defensive end from Notre Dame. Tom didn't have big calf muscles. They suggested those were football player legs. They weren't. So the moment this word entered our house, it crashed the very walls of everything we knew. I watched neighbor children jump and run, and Chris and Patrick stared, their eyes wide open. These worries nagged at us until that word Duchenne crashed our house. One evening while playing outside, Chris attempted to pedal a bike, something he couldn't really do. He suddenly screamed in pain. I carried him in the house, and the following morning, I met my husband at the door, and he was in tears. I said, what do you think of this? He said, I don't know. I said, you do. He's a physician as well. He said, I fought this word for every breath of my body, and it entered that day. It moved into our house, it interfered with every plan, and it rippled throughout our family and our extended family. The diagnosing physician was a neurologist and a colleague of my husband, and to this day I remember the chair I was sitting in holding my sons. It was gray. I'll remember his tie. It was striped. I remember that he didn't look at me. He simply said, Chris and Pat will lose the ability to walk. They'll lose the ability to lift their arms, and they will die. He added that my daughters would stop enjoying our family. They would lose themselves because of the amount of attention I would be unable to give them. And he said my marriage would fail. It wasn't my best day. 1984 is a long time ago. We met with physicians, many of them. The response was the same. There is no hope and no help. We studied the research. We tried to learn what was known and what was unknown, and the field was empty. Hope had no place in Duchenne. We decided we would raise our voices, we would try to best to understand the pathology, and we would do what we could, while in parallel, improving the quality of life for our families. We would do our best to buy time, how much ever that cost, and even if it was increments of 5 minutes. Our door was open to friends and families. Every single Friday night of our lives from that day forward, we invited every single kid in the neighborhood or in school into our house for dinner, of which I cooked, following a menu that was delivered to me on Thursday afternoon. We wanted to bring smiles inside. We would do anything to bring increased socialization and to increase friends. We did it selfishly because we needed to. We lived and we loved and we spent time together. It was true then and still remains so today. Therapeutic nihilism is here. It still is to some degree, but not in the major centers, thankfully. The investment in Duchenne was insignificant then. It's changed now. Thank heaven, thank God, and thank all of you. Chris died on September 29th, 1995. 7 months to the day, Patrick died. Did we give up on him? Did he give up on us? Did he just plain give up? Did he watch his brother and fail to live? I'll never know. So just after Chris died, I read his Latin notebook. I still do today. There was a Post-it note that said, "The meaning of life is a life of meaning." And then a small little scribble, "Mom, do something." Jenny, Tom, Michelle, and I have lived unsuccessfully learning to live without. It's not something I wish on any of you. So with that, we're going to talk about looking back. And so we're going to first start with the soft costs, the costs of bringing a smile into your house. So Jeff, could you tell me about what you spent, not the hard costs of the accommodating a house, buying a van, buying a wheelchair, out-of-pocket costs for medicines or services. Tell me what else it costs.
Well, one example is, as I mentioned, Noah was able to go to college, but in order to make that happen, I essentially had to go into further debt and buy a small house and let his good friends and fraternity brothers, 3 of them, live there for rent-free in return for helping Noah just transfer and get around campus and making sure. I think they would have done that anyway, but they had to be there with Noah. So I was always, as you cook dinner, I bought a house. I mean, you essentially, you just do what you have to do. So that's one example.
And Brian?
So prior to my son's diagnosis, I was quite frugal. I've always worked night and day. My family saw very little of me, and things had to change. And so what I made a conscious decision that from here on out, it's not about things, it's not about possessions, it's about doing things. And what we began doing was we would take a family vacation or two, oftentimes well beyond our means. And because we realized that every moment was important and that sharing that together was vital to the success of our family, we pushed it all aside. I became like the 20-year-old who has no sense of finances, and took my family to wherever we needed to go. We live in Maine, and it's quite abrasive in the winter months, and we always would take a week and go to Florida to just to get us through those winter months. So there was always something that was more important than your 401k.
Long ago, the banks were really open to giving money to young physicians. So my husband, as a young physician, had a loan on his office and his practice, and our house, and a van, and accommodating a house, and then 2 wheelchairs because my sons, in the absence of steroids, were growing very tall and very big. So Chris was about 5'6" and 180 pounds, and Patrick was about 5'8". He was bigger than Chris. And so there was a day when we were in that revolving door of the bank, and we sat in front of the president, Jack O'Neill, and he said to Tom and I, "You are now $1 million in debt. You'll pay this off when you're around 70. And indeed, my husband retired at 71. So, having made the final payment. All right. Now I'm going to make a rash statement for all of us who think about data. And I'm going to say that the diagnosis of Duchenne muscular dystrophy ends marriages. The marriage that you had, the marriage that you thought about is ended. And then you try, if there's a couple, some of them don't last at all, but as a couple, then you try to navigate your way back together. You're now just parents. And if you can find a way into the marriage again, you do. And sometimes you don't. Would you agree, Brian?
Absolutely. And as I mentioned, chronic illness is no stranger to our household. Rachel was 5 when she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and we thought we had our condition, and we were good. We learned to give injections and test blood, but that was not where it ended. Upon the diagnosis of Duchenne muscular dystrophy, I became the one, because of division of labor, in taking care of the boys and working on the science. I am more practical and science-minded. But it saw a separation in commonalities. Alice was focused here, and I'm focused over there. About that same time, when Matthew was first diagnosed, they were attending a parochial school, and the school was inaccessible. And so I had the bright idea, let's go ahead and raise money and put a lift in the school and let Matthew continue going to school with his siblings. The school agreed to it because I think that they believed we couldn't raise that kind of money, and it took an extraordinary amount of my time. Again, fostering a division between Alice and me. She's home taking care of the kids, and I'm nightly at meetings and going during the day to businesses and trying to find money to put this lift into the school. We became successful. The diocese said no. We sued the Catholic Church. And during this time, my wife and I are growing apart. Happily, I think we have come to some sort of an agreement. I still do sleep with one eye open. But I think, unlike our family is not unlike any others. You have one parent who technically understands Duchenne and is on the computer until 2 in the morning. It may be mom, it may be dad, looking for information, and the other one is providing the financial wherewithal so that you can do this. And coming to some sort of an arrangement is important. Does that mean that when a marriage ends that mom and dad go their separate ways? Probably not. Does it mean that things are very, very different and strained at home? I'll bet you all agree.
Yeah, I'll speak to that as well. When Lily was diagnosed with her brain tumor, we were not living together. We were living very close apart, but Noah had just returned from college the year before, and that's really kind of when it hit us and her especially hard that, okay, life was sort of going up for Noah there. He got out of high school, had friends, went to college, got a degree, and then started to go downhill. And then the stress level increased. We stayed very close together, and we weren't divorced, but we were living in separate residences about a half a mile apart. She couldn't bear to live with Noah and see him every day. She just couldn't handle it, and I could. I was lucky. So, that's just comes with the territory. Some people are able to adapt and better adapt, and I think that may have contributed to her brain tumor in some manner that she did not want to be around to see what happened to Noah.
My husband's a physician, and he helped people every single day at his office, 50 or so of them a day. And he came home and he couldn't. And so there was a day he said, I'm a failure as a physician and as a husband, and I agreed. And I felt Sue as a failure as a mother. And so as the boys became more involved in their disease, and we were saying, as I was saying, as a nervous mother, which I was called, that I think they're in respiratory distress and been dismissed by pulmonologists at the time. I slept on their floor for 7 years, turning them when they couldn't really get comfortable, making sure that they were breathing at night. And so there was a moment in our lives when I said to Tom, I don't even like you anymore. And he said, I don't like you either, but let's be roommates, and we'll share this responsibility, and then we'll see if we can come back to each other at another time. Because it ended up that we became good friends and roommates sharing jobs and responsibilities, and knowing how the rhythm of each other, and then finding a path together forward. So when we talk about the level of privacy, we talk about often this disease as an individual with this disease loses function, how the loss of privacy feels so overwhelming to us as parents when we watch it. But then when we think about privacy as well, and we bring in caregivers, we as a family lose privacy because they see all of our warts, if you will, all of our behaviors that may or may not be stellar on any given day. And strangers know about them and probably think something about them, or we interpret what they think about them. So Jeff, can you tell us about that?
Well, they saw a lot from me, that's for sure. Yeah, you know, when Lily wasn't there, it was me, and then Woody came back. But I wanted Woody to have an independent life. He had his own place. He was working. So you do. I mean, Noah needed 24/7 care, and I had people in my house all the time. And as somebody mentioned earlier, it's hard to find those people. It's hard to trust those people. They're constantly, not all of them turning over, but there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of just, you know, your whole life is sort of looking for help, basically. And I was able to afford to pay more than some of the state aid and the federal aid we got, and at the end of the day, I got a little better care for that sometimes because I would give them bonuses if I could, because you pay for that kind of thing, and your house is not your house anymore. And it kept my girlfriend from wanting to move in with me. Maybe that wasn't a bad thing, but no.
Brian?
So the decision to bring someone in the home, we had 2 sons with Duchenne, for the level of care that they needed. It took a long time because we understood in communicating with others what it actually meant. And we didn't have the financial resources to provide additional support. The people who this attracts, especially when it's a cobbled together schedule, it's 3 hours this day, it's 5 another, it's not regular. And the types of jobs they're doing, they're wiping someone's backside, they're giving a stinky teenager a shower. It doesn't attract always, you know, the highest caliber of employee. And you are inviting someone into your home, and they are seeing you sometimes on your best behavior, and sometimes they walk in after you've had an extensive discussion, argument. So it's really quite hard. And we've had a very unique group of people coming in to help the boys. Some people who knew no boundaries. I had a 50-year-old woman coming in one day and explaining to the boys about how good she looked in a leather miniskirt. You know, at 16 and 14 years of age, I didn't think they needed to be hearing that. We had others who would walk into the house after driving however far they did, and they'd been smoking, and they walked into the house, and you know, respiratory conditions are crucial in Duchenne, and I did not need them to be exposed to second and third hand smoke. So it was frustrating to us. So you open up your home. I have a plethora of hobbies. I've worked on houses. I run. I bike. I've got a bicycle sometimes that I'm working on that might be in the dining room. And Alice is horrified when someone will come into the home, and that's what they see. And God love her, I don't change. But these are the type of things that you go through. So your family is constantly on display, and it's more than we need.
We had Chuck. His name was Chuck Crawford. He moved in with us. He was a teenager. He used to drive our van, and because if you think about a van with a very empty back seat, Chuck would drop the kids off at school and maybe forget to pick them up because he was otherwise occupied in our van in a park. The chief of police was a friend of ours. In fact, Matthew Becker played with Patrick. They were good friends since kindergarten. When the chief of police shows up at your door, you you get worried, and then when he tells you where he found Chuck, and then when Chuck was really delighted with that, I mean, he wasn't speeding, the car wasn't hurt in general. But Chuck had quite the story to tell Chris and Pat, who immediately relayed that story to me. And they got very engaged in that opportunity, keep the van, Mom, even when we're well. So it is the privacy that you lose sometimes. So there's a ripple effect on our children. The doctor said to me, your daughters will want to run away from you because the amount of time and care that you give to your sons. I can say that my daughters haven't. In fact, when Michelle came home, Michelle was working in the banking industry. After getting her PhD in business psychology, she was in the banking industry and working in HR of a major international bank in London. And we were really thrilled about that because, you know, we saw a career that was going to zoom when she was going to be transferred to Singapore. I actually went to her home and I went to grandchildren, but my husband didn't really agree necessarily. So she called us and said she quit the job, absolutely quit the job, couldn't be there anymore, and she was going to become home to be a yoga instructor. Her father panicked just a bit, but she came home and she had this strange bandage on her arm, almost like on her wrist, and then I jumped to conclusion about slicing your wrists and all of the other things that I would worry about. Turns out she had a tattoo with Chris and Pat's name on it that said, I miss them. So the ripple effect is there and on all of our families. Brian, do you want to speak to that?
Rachel and Matthew were exceptionally close. It was a bond that, I don't know, it only happens I think within certain families, but they loved one another. She and Patrick, just the opposite. They fought like cats and dogs. And about the time Rachel was graduating from college was when Matthew was becoming very ill. And Rachel had a degree in communication, which meant that if she wanted any type of robust employment, she would have to leave the state of Maine. Farmers and people who harvest blueberries are not interested in somebody with a degree in communication. Neither are lobstermen. So she had considered going to New York City, but because of Matthew's health, I think that really put the brakes on her pursuits. And then when she decided that she needed some further education and she was taking some additional courses is when Matthew passed away. And that just really changed everything for Rachel. She went from part-time job to part-time job. She worked as a ramp agent at an airport. She worked in a supermarket and a deli department as a clerk. And it took her a long time to find herself. But there is a silver lining to that. Rachel decided that despite her aversion to science, she went back to school, and she recently took her NCLEX, and she's now an RN working at our local major medical center. So there was a time when I was really concerned that Duchenne would have that ancillary impact on her. The wake from Duchenne is extraordinary. But fortunately, in our situation, it has there was a silver lining to it. And the other aspect of it is she and Patrick have rehabilitated a relationship, and they are now great friends.
I've already mentioned Noah's brother Woody, his younger brother, but Woody was younger, but obviously stronger and much stronger, and had a personality that was a mile wide. Andy knows Woody, and he was Noah's best friend, and the way we knew how much he loved him is other people would come up to us, total strangers, and tell us, my wife and I, after observing them, say we were on vacation and they were around a swimming pool for 3 or 4 days, and Woody was helping Noah transfer from his chair into the pool and helping him swim around and just being with them and hanging out and maybe trying to get into the bar when they got older if they could. But we'd have perfect strangers at the end of the vacation come up and say, I've never seen such love between two brothers. It was amazing. So That's good. That was a beautiful thing. But of course and then Woody came back to Annapolis, so he delayed his career to work in Annapolis, and he had good jobs, but they weren't maybe the jobs he would have wanted. And then when Noah passed away 2 years ago, died 2 years ago, he was devastated, to say the least. But I have positive news right now. I mean, he's got a new job. He likes it. He's still in Annapolis, actually, and he's going to be okay, and he's going to have a good career, and he's got a lot of friends there. So it turned out to be a good story for Woody, but he spent 10 years not advancing his career because of his desire to be around Noah.
So in our family, we really wanted the girls to pursue higher education and away from home because we felt that the more education they could get and the better schools that they could get in, it was a requirement for us that we would cover any education up until one PhD, because we have one that has two and wants to go for a third. So we felt like we had to stop somewhere. We didn't think the bank would really receive us very well. But in that, they left because of their age and because of the time at a critical point when the boys were very involved in their disease. And they missed when they were admitted to the hospital, and they weren't there when they died. And for that, they've suffered. So we're going to just take a minute with Brian and I, because some of you in the audience have more than one child with Duchenne. And it's hard as a younger brother to watch an older brother lose function and then know you're next. And so maybe, Brian, you could speak to that a bit.
I found Matthew and Patrick to be to feed off of one another, especially when they were younger, going through school. And in some ways, that was also rather heartening because they encouraged one another. Matthew he was older. He was in student council first, so Patrick had to be in student council. He joined a variety of clubs, so Patrick had to join a variety of clubs. And I think that was supportive of each other. The one aspect of their life that I found really intriguing and entertaining was it being in another room when they were playing video games together. So Matthew and Patrick were just as competitive as any siblings can be. And if you were in the other room and you were hearing them yelling at one another and arguing over that's the wrong way, or you can't do that right, and what's wrong with you, and the one comment that Patrick would always say to Matthew, or vice versa, is, "I can't wait till there's a cure so I can beat you up." You hear these things from this family, and you think, wow, I guess it really hasn't had as much of an impact. And they would pass the controller to one another when they would reach a point in a game where they realized the other one had more ability than the other. And I've often wondered about the impact long term on the boys. And I'm happy to say Patrick has graduated from college. He has a degree in psychology, and he is working at the university. His goal, Patrick drives independently as well, and his goal was to, when Matthew was still in college, he was going to drive Matthew to college, and then in his senior year he would take himself to school. Unfortunately, that didn't come because Matthew had passed away. But there was never any animosity or jealousy with Matthew. I think from where he is right now, he sits in admiration of his brother, because that was just the way that those two are. There's some tough times to having a sibling who has Duchenne, but also I think that there are points where there is benefit as well. And I think like any other siblings, they pushed each other, and they helped each other to understand that there was more to life than just dwelling on things that they couldn't change.
So I think my two sons protected us. They would share these stories about, "Mom's upset, you better get her another Diet Coke so she can survive," or "Don't be too hard on her today, it's been rough for her." So I think our children protect us, and having two boys, they often protected us together, which seemed much more stronger than a single protection. And they protected my daughters as well. So I found that resiliency and that strength in them. They were also total opposite, where Chris would, should he have lived, be the valedictorian of his class. Patrick's goal was to buy a Ferrari, which I suppose I would have taken a loan out for, and be a gambler, which I think we all were at the time. So we're going to close this session because you've heard a lot of difficulty here, and it is really, really difficult to go through this land of Duchenne. It's extraordinary to lose a child when you expect that he'll outgrow you or take care of you when you're old. In our case, maybe pay for us when we're old. But there are moments of incredible joy. So I'm going to ask Jeff and Brian, and then I will share a moment of joy. Jeff.
There were many, actually, but I think one of the most memorable was when Noah was in a wheelchair, but we got to take him skiing in Winter Park, Colorado on that sit ski. And for the kind of the first time since he was 5 or 6, he was actually in control of his body to the extent where he could maneuver that ski down the hill and turn and not worry about having to stop because there was somebody 30 feet behind him that was going to brake for him. And to see the smile on his face when he came down that mountain, my wife and I would just sit there and watch him come down. That said it all.
So my moment of joy comes with a caveat. Patrick drives. He's been driving for almost 5 years. And like my daughter Rachel, I worry when he's out on the road. You know, when they leave the house, I worry about everybody out there who's texting or who might be otherwise distracted in driving. And it really, for both of them, it concerns me, but it's much more, the impact is much more burdensome for me to carry with Patrick, because if he gets into a wreck, you know, I worry about his ability to get out or to text me. But we're looking for independence. And with independence comes a cost. And this is the cost that I willingly pay, because I want Patrick to experience life fully. And that's something that's intangible, what that impact is on those of us who are at that point. And I want that for every young man who has this Duchenne. I'd like for them to be able to drive. I'd like for their families to be able to allow them to travel to Boston. Patrick's driven over the George Washington Bridge coming back from clinic in New York City. And that to me is probably the proudest moment, but again, with that little tinge of concern. But that's no different than with Rachel. You know, when she leaves the house or when she's doing something, she's going to the city, you know, I worry about her too. Is it different? Yes. Is it the same? Maybe a little bit, but it brings me extraordinary joy.
So in my house, my sons planned an intervention. They thought Tom and I needed an intervention. We probably still do. Because their premise of this intervention was the fact that when they were diagnosed and throughout their lives, they felt that we were overprotective. They asked me about wrapping their arms around them until it felt like a jail. So they planned an intervention to tell us that. And so we all sat around the table because they had something really important to say. And they had the meal pizza delivered. They opened a bottle of wine for us. I think Jenny was in charge of that, wasn't very good. And they bought brownies, which was also sort of the reward. And they sat down and told us that we were so overprotective that we were stifling their enthusiasm for life. And that we needed to stop and get out of their way, which we did. Thank you.
So I was sitting listening to this panel, and I thought, so we're going to do a little bit of polling in just a second, but to put a little context around how we're going to transition to the next panel, as a community, I was sitting here thinking, if I were somebody new to the community, this panel is amazing and it's profound, But one of the messages we want you to take away is that you found your tribe. And there are so many people in our community who are leaders in our community and who have done so much, and there are many in this audience. But there are some in our community whose sons have also done so much and are not in the community with us anymore, but whose parents have intentionally chosen to stay and to continue to lead our community. And so we've been listening to 3 of those people just now. And so I think as we acknowledge them as being a part of this panel, I just think we should just take a moment to thank them, because as a community, 2018 is not the same. That's why we're having this meeting as it was when their sons were diagnosed. And it's because we stand on the shoulders of Christopher and Patrick and Matthew and Noah and their parents. So let's acknowledge them for that, please. So one of the reasons we wanted to do this panel also was because there's a lot of data out there, and we started to talk about it at the last panel about the cost of living with Duchenne and what's involved in living with Duchenne. And that's considered, it's cost of illness data, it's called burden of disease data, it's health economic data, and we've been talking a lot about those costs. Pat referred to them well as hard costs versus soft costs. And so what we want to do right now related to this panel is do a little bit of polling around those costs and some cost estimates, because what we wanted was for some of the themes from today and some of what we get from now to help inform how we do a better job of doing some of that data collection and cost estimates within all of these data sets that we have. We have registries, and we have Social Security data, and we have MD StarNet surveillance data. And we can only make more informed decisions around payer determinations and access determinations if we inform that data more effectively to reflect the lived experience of Duchenne. So Ryan's going to lead us through right now some surveying, and that's the purpose of the surveying he's going to do.
First question's up.
Wow, and people are on it. So
Yeah,
Ryan,
people
go. And
are on it.
this
Keep
is for
going.
everybody in the room.
Keep at it. So I know I'm usually the.
Oh, and while this is happening, if the adults in the room can start to make the adults on the next panel can start to make their way up.
So I know I'm one of the speakers throughout the day that causes you not to have tissues at your side, but we're going to talk about financial impact with Duchenne. So you may need tissues associated with talking about how much out-of-pocket costs you all pay when associated with Duchenne, because we know that those expenses are quite high. And this data is really important to inform much of what Annie was talking about. And you see the first question up there, and your options are our family moved to a more accessible home, our family moved to be closer to extended family, family moved our existing home to be more accessible, and the last 2, a parent family member changed jobs to have more time for caregiving, and then a parent or family member stopped working to have more time for caregiving. And I see these answers trickling in. Good to see that they're coming in. So it looks like the large majority chose that our family modified our existing home to be more accessible, which certainly is a great deal of out-of-pocket expenses for the large majority of you. So we can move on to the next question, please. Okay, so in 2007, question is, our family paid the following unreimbursed out-of-pocket caregiver costs. Okay. Give you a second to let those trickle in. So this is for just 1 year. And since many of you probably did your taxes, hopefully these numbers are fresh in your mind. And 70% reported less than 10,000, and then 25% reporting between 10,000 and 30,000. So we can move on to the next question. Okay, here we're asking unreimbursed out-of-pocket direct medical expenses. So out-of-pocket copays, RX copays, supplements, hospitalizations. What was the number for that within these ranges? Okay. So the answers are falling in between the 10 to 30 range at 20% and the less than 10,000 at 80% as these come through. Okay, and I think we can move on to the next question. Okay, this is out-of-pocket for, unreimbursed out-of-pocket for equipment and accommodations, durable medical equipment, not funded by insurance, to include robotics, assistive technology, school and workplace accommodations. Give it a second for the online folks to be able to answer this question. So by far we're seeing the less than 10,000 be the majority of those reporting, but you can certainly add up all of these categories, and they don't encompass everything, which is some of what the last panel was talking about. So I think we can move on to the next question, and I think this is the last. We want to know, how do you pay for your paid care attendance? Give everyone a minute here. So it's looking like the majority at the moment are not using the a PCA. And the next highest is the Medicaid waiver. I know that some are still trickling in, but that's where it's falling out, where choice A is the majority and the next largest is the Medicaid waiver. So that kind of wraps up this set of polling questions, and I'm going to hand it over to Annie, who's going to take on the next panel. And I'll be back for the last set of polling questions after this.